Presidential Wealth Management. Have you gotten your $1,200 government check? Is it really tax-free? Can you really withdraw money from your IRA or 401k before age 59 and a half with no 10% penalty? The world is starting to climb out of the pit that was created by the COVID-19 virus. In the U.S., we need to climb out of what may be the shortest and deepest recession in a century. The Fed's quick and powerful $2 trillion support for the economic recovery and the credit markets has been a big positive for business and for the stock market. And Fed watchers are forecasting another $2 trillion in stimulus yet to come. But those trillions of dollars are essentially a loan from future U.S. taxpayers. Again, $2 trillion plus an additional $4 trillion, a loan from future U.S. taxpayers. Our guest today is Bruce Larson. Bruce is a certified estate planner and senior financial advisor on our Presidential Wealth Management team. Bruce, welcome. Thank you for your time in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here.
Quick question. I call it the last question first. You are the author of a book called A Concise Guide to Taxes in Retirement, and you are our go-to person for retirement tax strategies. With that in mind, $4 trillion from the federal government. First, can we send the bill to China? And second, if not, who pays?
Well, as far as sending things to China, or sending the bill to China, they hold a lot of our debt.
Yes.
We could certainly default on it. I don't think that's in the cards, but that's a possibility. And when we look at the mountain of debt in front of us, you can somewhat compare that to the debt at the end of World War II, about 100% of GDP, which we're crossing through that. And that debt was never repaid. The economy just grew itself out of it to where it became a smaller and smaller piece of the pie, but none of it was ever repaid. It was just rolled over. Now, in order to finance that debt or to pay the interest on it as we went forward, the knee-jerk reaction was to increase personal income tax rates, the highest rate being at 90%. So I think what you're going to see is there's going to be a big push towards higher tax rates. So everything we do today to structure your income to try to mitigate that tax is just a smaller increase you'll see down the road. Hopefully that won't happen for a while, but I think it's coming. I don't see any way around it. I think we're going to see higher taxes in our future.
Stay with us. This is the Eagle's Nest webcast. I'm Keith Weinman with Taylor Leary and our guest, Bruce Larson from Presidential Wealth Management.
Well, that's just lovely that future generations are footing the bill for today's stimulus money. Hey, I'll just send you guys the bill later, and you guys can stop beating up the millennials.
Well, when it comes due, we're going to be gone. So
I know. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, my name is Taylor Leary. I'm very excited for our topic today. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we really jump into things. For those folks that have been on in the past, it's always great to see you back in the room. And also, there are ways that you can engage with us throughout today's conversation. This is going to be highly interactive. Almost every single American has been impacted at some level by the COVID pandemic. We want to hear from you. There are two ways to get in touch with us in this live event. You can use the chat feature. So you'll notice the chat feature over on the right-hand side. By all means, please ask any question, make any comments. We love to hear people play along with what's going on. I will tell you that chat feature is private. So you're only going to be talking to the three of us. No other people in the audience are going to see. So if you have a question that maybe you feel a little bit sheepish about, maybe you're just a little bit apprehensive, you might feel like it's a stupid question. Believe me, there are no stupid questions. This CARES Act is massive and it's robust, and there's a lot to it. So if there's a question that you have, please plug that in the chat feature, and we'll do our best to answer those questions throughout. You'll also notice that there are a poll feature that we have. A poll is a great way to keep up that engagement, to hear what you have to say on very specific questions that we ask. So I will let you know when we're going to be posting a poll, which we'll be doing one here very shortly, and would love to hear your feedback. How are the COVID, how is the stimulus package, how is that affecting you? Things like that. So be on the lookout for poll questions, and we love to hear from you on that. You also will have an opportunity to schedule some time to do a one-on-one call with one of our advisors at Presidential. We want to make sure that you understand what's going on in today's kind of hectic, pretty volatile market conditions. So what we're offering is a free tax analysis for your current situation. We are not afraid of taxes. That is something that Presidential has, I think, led the way in this industry, that many financial services industries, or companies rather, are afraid of taxes. We are not afraid of taxes. We will absolutely help you dive through. One of the great things that we have is Bruce Larson on our team, who is able to decipher the tax code. He calls himself the recovering CPA. And so it's our pleasure to help you understand how your tax situation is affected, not only in your working years, but more importantly, during those retirement years. So take the time and schedule a one-on-one call with one of our advisors to go through that tax analysis. We'll also be talking a little bit more in a little bit about the impact of your 401k with some of the CARES Act stimulus. There are some provisions that were laid out in that stimulus plan that actually allow some special rules just for 2020 for your 401ks and IRAs. So you want to make sure that your plan provisions allow for some of these, but we'll happily go through those rules and help you understand the plan provisions that can be set up for you so you can access the money in your 401k or IRA if necessary. We're not suggesting that's the case to be, but make sure that you understand the rules that are involved. All right, here we go. Let's get the cat out of the bag, right out of the gate, and let's see what you all are looking at for the stimulus check. All right, so what I've put up here is, how are you using your CARES Act stimulus check? I put 4 options. I'm sure there's a lot more. Are you using it to cover day-to-day living expenses? Were you massively affected by COVID? Did your business get shut down? We would love to hear that. Fill us in the chat box. Are you saving it for a rainy day? Maybe you received a check, but you actually don't really need to use it. So you just kind of put that in the bank, and whether it's $1,200 or $2,000 or whatever the number is, are you able to use that? And then, did you use it to buy something? I always laugh about this. My mom and dad. My mom is almost 70 years old. My dad's in his early 70s, and my mom was looking at a brand new mountain bike, and so she used that stimulus check to pay for a brand new mountain bike, or at least part of a brand new mountain bike. I don't know if you're familiar with the mountain bike world, but those things can be pretty darn expensive. Or the 4th answer is, you did not receive a stimulus check at all. You either didn't qualify as an individual or a family unit. Would love to hear this. I'm going to leave the poll question up for a bit. So if you don't get to it right away, be sure to check in. Right now, we've got 100% of respondents are showing that they did not receive a stimulus check. So very fascinating so far. That's either means that you're above the 150 marker as a couple, or above 75 with the phase out. So I'm sure we're going to get to that here in a moment with Bruce. Bruce, now that we've got you on here, we've done a couple of episodes on our podcast and some articles that we put on our website, but this is really our first discussion with somebody like you. You got the short end of the stick, or you maybe pulled the short straw here to really wade through the technical language of the stimulus act, which the CARES Act. We're not going to focus on the business side of this today. We're going to be focused on the individual front. So how did this affect individuals? So the question that I've been getting from a lot of my clients, first and foremost, is the stimulus check that they received, is that taxable?
No, that's really simple. The answer is no. It
Okay.
is completely tax-free money. Don't worry about paying taxes. You don't have to report it anywhere. You're good to go.
What I found to be hilarious is that the president of the United States signed the check. And I don't know if that dawned on anybody else, but he felt like this is coming from me. So darn it, I'm going to sign that darn thing. This is not going to come from the U.S. Treasurer or whoever normally signs those checks.
Well, the majority of the people
where you were getting that money from.
Yeah, the majority of the people didn't actually get a check. They got a direct deposit.
Right.
And, we are seeing on the poll that 66% didn't receive a check.
Yeah.
And what's bizarre is my son, who's 19, was set up on direct deposit, has still not received any money, where my daughter, who was not set up on direct deposit, already got a check. So they said the checks were going to take a while, direct deposit come quick. So in my family, it's been opposite of that. So I can feel your frustrations when you say you did not receive a payment, because Charlie he's got something to spend that money on. Let me tell you, he's checking the mailbox every day, even though it's supposed to come direct deposit.
So he's got a hole burning in his pocket for money that's coming his way. And so that was a softball question. That was a pretty easy one. Here's another one. There's a lot of folks that are receiving unemployment benefits. We've been talking about this since Keith and I really jump-started this webcast. I mean, we've kind of gotten this thing in the very beginning where we had 30 million people signing up for unemployment. In fact, the number just came out today, and now that number has dropped to 2.1 million, I believe, filled out for brand new unemployment just this week. So we're seeing a trend move downwards, which is obviously great. Are those unemployment checks, are those taxable?
Yes, they absolutely are. It's just included as ordinary income. There's actually a separate place that you report unemployment compensation. And because in Colorado taxes are based on federal taxable, they're also taxable in Colorado. Now, some states do give you a break, but Colorado, it's fully taxable. Now, what they haven't said is, there's an additional amount, stimulus money coming out on top of regular unemployment. And they haven't said whether or not that's taxable. I assume it is, because it's coming through the same system as unemployment.
So is that additional $600 that they keep talking about?
Right. And I looked high and low. They haven't said anything. So because they haven't said anything, I assume it's just taxable unemployment benefits.
So one follow-up question to that is, there have been many stories out there. I was speaking with a client here recently, and they said that her 20-something son who just graduated college is unemployed, and he's earning more money unemployed than he was with his job. Do you think some of those folks that are experiencing that are going to have a higher tax bill as a result?
Well, yeah, obviously, if they've got more income, they will have a higher tax bill. Now, of course, they're not having to pay the FICA on it.
Okay.
The 7.65 withholding that you'd pay if that was coming through W-2 wages, but they will have a higher tax bill. And I would really caution people that are going for the money, because I think, just in areas that are opening up, they're opening up very, very slow. And if you're offered your job back, I would take it, because when those unemployment benefits run out, that job may not be there for you. Mm-hmm. So, I think work beats unemployment all day long.
It certainly does.
Even if it currently does, even if it currently pays a little bit less.
Right.
Bruce, off the beaten path just a little bit, how do you react to the argument that some are putting forth that there are a lot of people who are saying I can make more money on unemployment than I can going back to my job? Well, what are your thoughts about that?
That's just the kind of the same answer, in that, maybe you're getting more money now, but when it runs out, what if the job isn't there anymore? If they've hired somebody else because they asked you to come back and you didn't raise your hand and show up, they're probably going to replace you. So now you've got to go hunt for a job once your unemployment's out. And when those benefits run out, they're going to run out for everybody. So a lot of people are going to be on the street looking for a job. And with the rate of small business closure, those jobs may not be there.
And how long does that extra spiff on top of the normal unemployment go on?
Actually, I didn't research that. I'm not sure how long it is. I think it's like 6 months or something like that. It's not real long.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a short-term solution.
The CARES Act is an acronym for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act. And it's huge, right? It's like, didn't you say it was how
880 pages.
800 pages.
Yes, over 800.
Did you read the whole thing?
No, I only read the IRA part of it.
Okay.
I didn't read the business section of it, which is the most complex part of it.
Okay, then let's go to the most complex part. Let's go about to the question, for example, can we tap IRA money and 401k money before age 59 and a half without paying a penalty?
Yes, that's one of the biggest provisions in the CARE Act is typically if you're under 59 and a half and you withdraw money out of an IRA or 401k, you pay a 10% penalty. Now, if that's in a 401k and you're over 55, you can get around the 10% penalty provided you're fully retired. So there's kind of a hodgepodge of regulations, but the bottom line is just about everybody should be able to pull money out of either an IRA or a 401k without paying that penalty. Now you're still liable for the taxes, but that kind of goes into another area of the CARE Act in that if you withdraw money out of your IRA because you're up against the wall, you need some money, you have 3 years to put that back in the IRA and then you're not taxed. So you can kind of use it as a short-term loan. Now, if you don't pay it back, you have 3 years to pay the taxes due. And they haven't issued guidelines on that because does that mean I have to pay it equally this year, 2021 and 22, or can I wait till 2022 and pay it all? So it's going to be interesting how that actually shakes out. It's going to take some upgrades to the IRS system because you will get a 1099 saying, here's how much you took out of your IRA. How are you going to inform them whether or not you're going to pay it back in 2 years?
Exactly.
So it's going to be a compliance nightmare for the IRS. I'm sure they're going to have to build out some systems because none of the IRS systems are maintainable. Anytime there's a new provision, they got to add something else onto it because it's such an antiquated system. So it's going to be interesting how taxes actually get processed when the dust settles, next April.
So sorry, that's an interesting one. I have a client who is been affected by the CARE or by COVID in the sense that she got laid off from one of her jobs and furloughed or they shut down. She was a part-time instructor for a health facility. And she has also another side business. And she came to me and then, things were a little bit tight, but she tapped her IRA for a little bit of money. And what was amazing is that that's going to be void of that 10% penalty. But again, with some of the details about the 3-year payback, that's pretty astonishing. So this might be that perfect window for those individuals, and I wouldn't say this is across the board, but for those individuals that want to tap their 401ks or IRAs to maybe pay for maybe a job or a new business or that entrepreneur that says, you know what, maybe I can go to that bucket as opposed to going to the bank or maybe the HELOC or something like that. Have you experienced any other clients of yours that might be having that kind of idea spin around in their head?
Yes, I actually talked to an individual yesterday. I think he might actually be on the podcast here, who is, and I won't mention his name, but he's been furloughed and he's thinking about starting his own business. So he could he's actually over 59 and a half, so the penalty is not an issue. But he could potentially, if the business takes off, pay that money back within 3 years and be in pretty good shape. Now, one thing to keep in mind, don't just willy-nilly go pull a bunch of money out of your IRA or 401k to go buy a car or something, because you do have to have a valid COVID reason to avoid the 10% penalty. So it's not available to everybody. If you're still working, have seen no interruption due to COVID, you really are not eligible for this, but I have no idea how they're going to track it.
Bruce, give
So-
us some examples of a valid COVID reason. It goes beyond yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's being laid off. It's having hours reduced. It's having to take care of an at-risk person at home, like a mother, grandmother, having to take care of kids because you lost the daycare because all the daycares have been closed down. So it's fairly broad. And I would just say you got to document it, and I think you're in pretty good shape. But just make sure you have some valid reason before you access any of these provisions.
Be honest and document it well.
Yeah. Yeah. Throw a note in your tax file and you're good.
And this is one of those instances that just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. And when it first came out, there was all kinds of crazy stuff flying around the internet about what the CARES Act would allow you to do. And I had a client call me up and he says, "Hey, I heard I can pull out $400,000 out of my IRA with no 10% penalty." And I says, "You're 71. You've got no 10% penalty anyway. Why in the heck would you want to pull 400,000 out and pay all those taxes when we can, pull it out over time and keep you in a much lower tax bracket?" So don't do it just because they say you can. Great point, Taylor.
So, sorry, Keith.
Oh, no, I was going to move on. Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we're good. So kind of sticking to this retirement plan structure, especially with 401ks. IRAs are much more stringent about this sort of thing. They actually you can't take a loan out of your IRA necessarily. But with employer-sponsored plans, like a 401k, there are many times that there are provisions inside of those 401k plans that allow that participant to take a loan out up to $50,000 or half of the account balance when it's typically above about $10,000. And so it sounds like there's some changes in that world as well. Can you provide a little bit of color there?
Yes, they up the limit to 100,000 or 100% of your plan balance. So
Okay.
a pretty large increase, but keep in mind that those loans have to be paid back. If they're not paid back, then it's deemed a distribution, and at that point it's taxable. So before you jump in and borrow money out of that 401k, make sure that you've got the means to pay it back. It's just like any other loan, because if you feel that you might get laid off from that company, you really need to look at a document called the summary plan description, and we'd be glad to translate that for you. They're somewhat dense, even though it says summary. But some plans require you, as soon as you separate from service, you have to pay all that back. So if you pull 100,000 out, a week later you get laid off, now you got to pay all that back. Well, you've probably spent some of it. So it's going to turn into a distribution. One other thing, just while we're on 401ks, is for all of these kind of enhanced provisions of 401ks that the CARES Act allows, the 401k plan actually has to update their plan document to allow it. So just because the CARES Act says you can do it, your 401k doesn't have to say that. Okay, now from what I've heard, most plan sponsors are moving very quickly to add just an amendment to their plans to basically say everything in the CARES Act applies. But before you start counting your money, talk to your plan administrator and make sure it's available. One other thing is on distributions from 401ks, typically there was a mandatory 20% federal withholding that had to be withheld, sent into the IRS. That's waived for this year. Now you can still have them withhold taxes, and we'd be glad to calculate, what your tax situation is for you to see how much to withhold, but it's no longer mandatory, at least for this year. And especially if you're just going to pull it back and say you're going to pull it out and then you plan on paying it back in 3 years, it would be crazy to send 20% of it off to the IRS. So a lot of kind of variables in all of these situations that need to be looked at before you jump into something.
That's one of the general rules why you probably shouldn't hold a 401k into retirement, that 20% withholding. I've actually run across people that have retired, kept their 401ks, and make withdrawals every month to meet their daily living expenses. And what they're doing is they're giving that with that 20% holding, they're giving the government interest-free loans
Yeah.
on their money.
Well, and actually what they're doing is, even though that 20% is being sent off to the IRS, it's still included as the taxable portion of the distribution.
Oh,
So they're paying taxes just to send it off to the IRS. It's absolutely insane. Now, a lot of 401k plans, actually, if you set it up on regular monthly distributions, that's not considered rollover eligible, and you're not subject to that 20%. But
and
if you just call them up and say, hey, send me 20,000, that's going to be subject to the 20% withholding every year other than this one.
so unconditionally, the 20% withholding is not in force this calendar year. Is that correct? This
That's
tax
correct. That's
That is
correct. Just for this year.
the 20% withholding automatic from 401ks, not this year.
Not this year. Don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
So
And
I
that
want
goes
to do our chat feature or chat box real quick.
Yeah.
And again, remind our listeners that use the chat feature. We want you to engage. We got a comment from and / question from Mark. If the Democratic Party wins the presidency in 2020, keeps the House and retakes the Senate, so essentially has full control over everything, will the current estate tax exemption of 11 million per person be reduced to what it was before? And do you think that possibly could happen in 2025? So it sounds like Mark is asking, how in the heck are we going to pay for this massive stimulus? It could very well go to some of the tax changes that occurred in 2018. Anything to add to that there, Bruce?
No, I think just about all tax planners are working under the assumption that the 2018 tax changes will sunset in 2025, if not sooner. And that would bring that estate exclusion from 11 million down to 5 million, adjusted for inflation since it was set. So essentially cut it in half. And I would think that they would start picking away at that. You know, when I first started in this business, the estate exclusion was 625,000. So they could certainly go back to that. So that's, you know, it's a moving target. We got to watch it all the time. That's why tax planning on at least an annual basis is so critical, that you have to be aware of what these changes are and try to project for them. And we even have the capability of, you know, if you say you want to see taxes go up 20%, let's plug that into your plan and see what it looks like. So I agree that taxes are going up one way or another, whether it be estate taxes, income taxes, whether they bring out a wealth tax, which I think is highly likely if the Democrats win total control of the government. But, you know, they're setting pretty high levels on that. So hopefully it doesn't affect most people. But, you know, somebody's got to pay for all this stimulus somehow. You know, if not paying it back, at least paying the interest on it.
Bruce, it's also a double-edged sword. Let's look at the other edge. When the government needs money, it creates it. And that created money goes into the system. And so now we've got an additional, we're starting out here with an additional $4 trillion going into the system. Now, keep in mind, if you had $1 million in a large suitcase in $100 bills, $1 million in $100 bills would fit into a large suitcase. Okay. $1 billion would be 1,000 of those suitcases, and $1 trillion would be 1 million of those suitcases. The point is, that's a lot of money. When the government needs the money, it creates the money, but then the money goes into the system. Doesn't that cause inflation? So are we looking at a tough battle against inflation in the years ahead because of all the money that's being created now? And I ask that question in part because that will affect just about everybody who's with us today in their retired years.
Well, yes, I think it is going to be inflationary at some point, but not until we get back to full employment, because employment is always a drag on inflation. And by the way, when I was talking about the debt created from World War II, I said there were two factors that got us out of it. We grew our way out of it and we taxed our way out of it. Well, the third way we got out of it was we inflated out of it, because there was pretty high inflation in the 50s, then it hit us again in the 70s, to where if everything else goes up, it makes the amount of debt look smaller. So I think some form of inflation is going to show up at some point. But again, I don't think that's really going to happen until we start seeing more full employment. And when you look at the devastation to small businesses, I think that could be a while. So I think we may have a bit of a reprieve from inflation for a while, but at some point it's going to come.
In the 2020s?
Yeah, I would say so. And part of that kind of comes down to what are we going to do with all these unemployed people from these closed businesses? You know, are they all going to start driving the Amazon van, or are they going to, you know, what are they going to do? And, you know, they're talking about a universal income. Now, let's just give them money for sitting around doing nothing. Well, that would probably be fairly inflationary. So, you know, there's a lot of moving pieces here that, you know, I'm an accountant, I'm not an economist. And it's kind of funny with an economist. When in my younger days, I was a elk and deer guide. I took two economists out on a deer hunt. Find a nice deer. One of them hits 10 yards to the left, the other one hits 10 yards to the right, and they gave each other a high five and said, on average, we got him. So I don't really trust anything an economist tells me. You just kind of have to wait and see and just try to get through it the best you can. And I know that probably doesn't give people a lot of I don't know, optimism, but that's really what it is. 'Cause, you know, we've seen, you know, with my book and my tax software, I've had to update that 3 times in the past year and a half due to tax law changes. And that was before Corona hit. So, you know, it's going to be a moving target.
The value in that is the value in you bringing it up is not that we can precisely predict it, but that you can be ready for it in a retirement income plan.
Right.
Realize that prices are going to rise. Now, we can't tell how much, but we can make a best guess. And just doing that, having that as part of your plan is going to leave you a lot better off than if you think that everything's going to stay the same, because it's not, correct?
Yeah. Well, but when you look at like in Japan, you know, starting in about 1989, they printed a ton of money and they never really saw any inflation. So, you know, we could be in that situation. Unfortunately, that's a fairly stagnant economy, unfortunately. And I don't think that's going to be there. But again, I don't think you have to worry about inflation until you see the unemployment back down to around the 4.5% range from the current over 14% range.
Yeah, that's excellent. So, Mark, thank you so much for asking the question, because I think it's really important to understand what's possible out there. What are some things that we're seeing on our end? If our listeners are interested, we had Dr. Michael Busler on a webinar a couple of weeks ago. And if you go to presidentialwm.com, you can check it out at, if you click into the webcast tab on the top bar, you can actually go to that. And during that conversation, he talked a lot about the stimulus, but also with this idea of the economy and kind of where things were. He was extremely rosy and very optimistic. In my opinion, a little maybe too optimistic, but so far since that conversation, the market's been doing very well. We're starting to reopen things, and we're starting to see some movement on the vaccine front. So he very well could be correct in that statement. But if you're interested in diving into the economics and really the deep philosophical and kind of the academic part of things, that would be a fantastic webcast to review. So again, presidentialwm.com. Go to the webcast tab and you can find all of our past webcasts over the last 10 weeks. So fantastic resource for you there. One of the things that I want to throw in your world there, Bruce, and we were talking about printing money and talking about inflation. And there's this new theory on monetary policy. Now, I know we're here to talk about the CARES Act and how it affects individuals and all that, but the new idea is that it doesn't matter how long or how much debt a government carries, as long as interest rates stay low, they're fine, and GDP stays just slightly above that. What's your take on that?
I think you can get too much debt, and the only reason that that system works is that we have faith in the US dollar. If that faith slips, it's over. That debt will crash the economy. Now, I do think that we will continue to have faith in the US dollar. It is the world currency, but you will reach a point where your interest payments, even low interest payments, become too much to handle. And if we do get into inflation, that means that interest rates are going to go up. So that debt, as you have to refinance it, becomes more and more expensive. Now, I did hear the treasurer say, prior to this coronavirus, most of the Treasury's debt was 1 to 5 years. But he has been refinancing a lot of that out 20 and 30 years at these low interest rates. He's the first treasurer that's had the sense to do that. So I'm glad that he's done that. So that will, push it back a ways. But eventually, when you have to refinance that and you go from a 2% rate to a 6.5 or 7, that's going to really start dragging on the economy. So I think it's fairly short-sighted to say debt doesn't really matter.
And they recently they launched that 20-year treasury, didn't they? In the hopes of raising some money, and it did, and it is raising some money to go toward that. But when I actually saw the figures, it really doesn't do much.
No, because even though they're trying to refi it now, there's not too many takers. Who the heck would give somebody all their money for 20 years for 2%?
Exactly. Exactly.
I certainly wouldn't.
So what about, one of the effects of all of this is people worried about debt. Your thoughts quickly on that. And then I want to go back to the CARES Act with one more question. But first, where is the debt now, and where would you really be worried about it?
As far as defaults on debt?
Yes.
Well, I wouldn't worry about treasuries.
Yeah.
Corporates, I think you have to be selective. You've got to look at companies that should be able to come out of this fairly unscathed. Secured bank loans are fine as long as they've got good security behind them, and it's a company that should get through things all right.
Okay.
I think it's a time to just really start being selective. The ratings agencies have a history of being behind on their ratings, not downgrading stuff fast enough, not upgrading it fast enough. I certainly don't have time to go through individual bonds, so I'm happy to use one of our managers that has a history of doing a good job of navigating different types of fixed income markets to do that for me. But it's a time to be very selective.
Of all the changes in the CARES Act, and I want you to include things we've talked about, the fact that RMDs could be suspended. I never knew that.
Yeah, they absolutely are suspended.
Yeah, and then that the 59.5, the 10% penalty, that could be temporarily lifted. But it goes beyond that. It goes to changes in our lives, changes in our economy, changes in businesses. What in all this that we're going through has jumped out at you as something that we will most likely live with for a long, long time, something that we would have never thought would have gone away, something that would have come about because of this, some changes in our lives to get ready for?
Yeah, I think you're going to see fairly solid GDP growth, which means your investment should do pretty well. But the flip side of that is with all of these small businesses going under, and with the fear created by the virus for people that just are staying home, even when the restaurants open up, I think there's a lot of people won't go back.
Yes.
I think you could see strong economic growth with very high unemployment. So what that means, for me on a personal level is my investments may be doing pretty well, but I may have both kids living with me for the next 5 years because they can't get a job. Actually, they're both employed at this point, so I'm in pretty good shape now. But I think that's what you're going to see. I think it's going to be, I think you're going to see probably even wider differences in earnings, where people that are high up and strong corporations doing well, where people on the street, waitresses, waiters, they're going to struggle because I think there's been so much fear of this virus put into people that I don't see people coming back. I was down in Buena Vista last weekend, my wife and daughter and a friend of ours, and they opened up the restaurants. So we thought, well, we haven't been able to go out to dinner. Let's go out to this place. And it's the hot spot right down on the Arkansas River. We were one of 2 parties in there.
Wow.
And it was a terrible experience because a nice waitress, very good, but she's got a mask on and gloves. And it's just not the same. When I go out, I want some hustle and bustle going on. I want to have some fun. I want to see some people. Even though I'm kind of an introvert, if I make that decision, I want to be out amongst them. And sitting in this big dining room with only 4 tables in it and only 2 of them with people, I think that's going to linger. So I think you're going to see, like I said, fairly strong GDP growth with very high unemployment.
This might be the moment where we're seeing that chasm widen and widen and widen between, this income disparity, the rich and poor, all of these class battles that we've had over the last 5 or 6 years, or really the last 10 years since the Great Recession. This might be another thing that just really kind of opens that up. I certainly hope, from my perspective, that it isn't that moment, but it's going to be interesting. A quick note or a quick question about the suspension of RMDs. We kind of glossed over that, but that is a big provision that is out there for a lot of our clients, especially those clients. They just last year got those RMDs. Many of them got punted out for another 18 months. So it went from 70 and a half of those required minimum distributions to 72. That was for our older clients. For those clients that have inherited retirement assets, those haven't really changed, but actually that's not true. They did have those changes occur, but with the suspension of the RMDs this year, for both our older clients that are in that age range and for those clients that have inherited money, do you see that as a good thing, a bad thing, and what is the opportunity that exists as it relates to that suspension?
Well, I think it's a good thing because anytime you have more flexibility, that's a good thing. So I'm seeing clients of mine, not a large number of them, but are saying, I don't want to take my RMD because I can't go spend money. I had to cancel 2 cruises. I'm not going anywhere this year. I don't need it. So that gives them the flexibility to let their account values come back up and not have to take that distribution. So that's a good thing. It also provides an opportunity, I think, for those people that may have both RMDs coming out of their own IRA, but also money coming out of an inherited IRA. Because as you know, we see a lot of mistakes with inherited IRAs. People just don't realize they have to take that money out. So this might be a year that you kind of get square, where you say, okay, I'm not going to take the RMD out of my IRA, but I'm going to catch up all the missed distributions out of this inherited IRA and kind of come clean with the IRS. And there's a way that you can do that and typically avoid the penalty, which is, as you know, missing an RMD, the penalty is 50% of the amount you should have taken out. So if you've held this inherited IRA for 10 years and never taken any money out, you probably get some pretty good penalties stacked up. But typically the IRS is pretty forgiving on that if you report it correctly, and we'd be glad.
You have to write a really, really good apology letter.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. You basically either say, I'm stupid, or my financial institution was stupid and that's why we missed this, and we want to get square with you, so here you go. So that's essentially how it's written. And I've never had anybody have to pay that penalty if it's done correctly.
Agreed. And don't forget to do the RMD as soon as you discovered you missed it.
Right, exactly.
And that should be in the letter as well.
Right.
Wow.
And the timing on that's a little strange. So, don't try to do this on your own. Give us a call and we can walk you through the process.
You've said one thing as long as I've known you. Generally, everything you do financially has an effect on your taxes, has tax ramifications, everything.
Yeah.
Positive can be negative. Has that been amplified now as we move forward by
I don't
COVID and
know.
everything?
I don't know if it's been amplified as much as it's been complicated.
Complicated.
Because taxes are a multivariable problem. As you add more and more variables, that just gets more complicated as you go. So it's certainly gotten more complicated.
Fascinating. And it gets so with regard to taxes, interesting 2 points we've made. Taxes are going to go up and get more complicated, right?
Yeah, I would say that would be a fair, that's the way it's, other than this brief reprieve we've had for, say, the last 15 years or maybe even 20 years of taxes going down, the history of the income tax is it's always going.
Presidential Wealth Management securities and investment advisory services are offered through Forta Financial Group, Inc., a registered broker-dealer, member FINRA and SIPC.